Hey gang, it's I, DrBossKey, and today I thought we would cover analog stick controls and control tuning in general. As of the Shmup Creator engine version 1.3.1, which just came out just a couple days ago, we now have more control over the controls that we set. So why don't we jump over to that? I'll try to keep this brief because it can be a complex subject. Yeah, so here, first off is, if you go into, probably, let me just show you. So here you can see I have the nice controller overlay. I'll drop a link in the description for the streamers that want to include this. So basically, analog stick control, right, is, you can see here I'm basically adding just a little bit of input, very minimal, to the analog stick, and that means I can go really slow. And at the maximum side of the analog sticks, I can go at my maximum speed. Now, if I'm using the D-pad, I can't go really slow. I can only go from 0 to 100% speed for the craft. And maybe I'll take a quick over here to show you guys this. So if you come over here to your player entity, you have your move speed, right? So here's an interesting one. So for instance, if you have a D-pad, though every time you tap, this is, you can see this is really, really, really fast. But every time you tap, it means you're going to, based on the lightest tap, you're going to move at your maximum speed every time you do that. And if you use an analog stick, you have a mapping of the range, still super, super fast, but you have a range from 0 to 100, if you will. And that then gives you a different level of control. So let me go back and change that so I don't forget where I was at. So there's where you change that. So the other thing you should be aware of, so if you come over to preferences, come over to controls, then you have two parameters here. One is called your stick dead zone. We'll cover that in a second. And the other one is your stick sensitivity. It says sensibility here. It's just a typo. We'll get it fixed. So, and what I have for my game is I have it set to stick dead zone 5 because I want to have, how do you explain dead zone? So basically, think about it like this. So a dead zone is when your stick is at, let's see here, when your stick is at the neutral spot and you want to give it input, then the dead zone is from that neutral spot. When you start to give the stick movement, it is the minimum amount of direction the analog stick has to be given in order to start being detected to, or ignored in some cases, but to be detected in order to then start giving you input, right? So to give you an example of that is, so dead zone is 0. And then, you know, if I give, you can barely even see it here, and you can see the overlay. Like I have mine dialed really, really close. Now, there's this thing called stick drift. So all analog sticks have variance from the way that they're made, like coming out of the factory, because they're sensors that and mechanics that are measuring the stick itself. And so what happens, and this happens on a lot of different controllers, and especially it can happen over time as well. So when you get a new controller, you have a lot less stick drift because the analog stick isn't as worn in. And then over time, as you use it, you will start to sometimes pick up stick drift. So all developers have to go through this process of mapping essentially what's called the dead zone. So if you see, I take this to 0, or you can't go to 0, you can only go to 1. 1's your minimum. And I started here. So you can see that the ship is moving without any inputs, and that's called stick drift. Sometimes it's depending on how, and this also is how analog sticks, when the device is started, how they calibrate, et cetera, like we don't have to go into that. But the point being that is if you're experiencing stick drift, then what you want to do is you want to come in here and you want to change your dead zone to greater not. If you make it too high, if you make it like 99, then what's going to happen is you will have to come almost all the way out to the very edge before you actually get input. And in some cases, you can't even hit diagonals because that range is no longer mapped, because the diagonal is a mapping of the X and Y in the diagonal axes. And it's a combination of those. So you can even find problems. And you just have to tune these things. You got to figure this out. So, and it's not hard, but it takes a little time to wrap your brain around it. So here, still even, and I'm using a PlayStation 5 controller in this case. So all generations of controllers are different depending on the age. So you want to, and we'll go over some of the pro tips for this as well. But you want to go over essentially as many controllers as possible and kind of find the nice medium. So anyways, and you can see here, so I have the diagonals mapped again, and I don't have to press as far. I can press a little bit further on the analog stick range in order to achieve that first level of input, but I also have a nice range. Okay, so now that you got these things in mind, let me walk you through a couple things. That's Twitch, supporting my buddies. Okay, so you have basically two main styles of input, which we talked about, right? D-pad, direct speed mapping, analog stick, analog speed mapping. So this is from 0 to 100, and your speed ranges for your player craft. So on the analog stick side, so you have a couple choices for yourself, and one of them is, as just a designer, these are your choices here. So you can set your stick sensitivity to 0, and what that means at this point is that as soon as coming out of the dead zone, the analog stick is moved, it will then map 100% of your speed to that direction. So here you can see, if you look at the overlay graphic, right? As soon as it's, I'm kind of in here as well. So you can see that because I have a stick zone up to 30, I have to actually move the stick physically to about that range of 30. But when I do, I basically have full speed input, and I have no small range. So no slow speeds, because it's mapping my speed 100%, right? So you can also, by default right now, I think the dead zone is something really, really small. And by default, it's stick sensitivity is set to 0. So, and what a lot of times, a lot of developers, what they will do is they will map their D-pad, because they want you to have very close to maximum speed input for controls without any delay. So what they'll do is they'll just map D-pad, they'll map to the analog stick ranges 100% of what you get from a D-pad input speed. Okay, so but you may find here it's a little harder to see. So if it's mapped to something really low, like 5 or 10, and it's 0 for speed, what you'll find is when you're giving the analog stick small amounts of input, it will feel a little squirrely and out of control, because a lot of times what players do, especially less experienced players on analog sticks, what they do is they do this, right? They're just basically going right to the edges. They're pressing the analog stick around as much as possible, and they're not using their inner ranges very much. But in the case of having these parameters set to stick zone 5 and stick sensitivity to 0, it will feel a little squirrely, because you're getting all those maximum inputs, and the axes for changing the analog stick around change quite rapidly, right? So what I recommend is probably something like 30 or 20 if you're going to just map your maximum speed to your analog stick controls, and that'll make it to where when you have a bit more of that, like this is D-pad, right? So that, and if you're flicking the analog stick, you'll get a very similar range of responses when you're using the inner ranges for the analog stick. Now for me, so that's one thing. So that's just basically a fancy way of saying, look, if you want to map your maximum speed ranges to your analog stick and have no speed variance speed changes over the pressing of the analog stick to those ranges, to their directions, then that is the way you would set up for you. And a lot of developers do this. Sometimes they do it because they're lazy. Sometimes they don't want to design for it. Sometimes they don't want to create a more sluggish input experience for their shmups. So in the old school days, right, all of us shmuppers, we only had D-pad. That was it. And with the advent of analog sticks, we had more control for people that really were able to dial in those controls. But those controls, you didn't want to take the same amount of time. You didn't want to take longer time to achieve the same tightness of control that you get with the digital experience. That's the D-pad, right? So, and that's just design-wise something you're thinking about. And and a lot of times people still prefer to play their shmups with D-pad, because that's the way a lot of the gameplay was designed. Me personally, especially building a bullet hell experience, and being an old school gaming console, console gaming guy. I've used controllers for my entire life. I use PCs, keyboards. I've used it all, right? So, but one of the things I do enjoy is that when I use an analog stick, the analog stick is softer. It's easier to use. I'm not pressing and tapping as hard. Like, yes, I don't get as much control, but you can design for that in mind as well. So here is what I've done. So this is the second piece of this, right? So mine is set to 5. And now I think 0.4 is kind of the nice range for me. And you can see here. So especially for me with bullet hell dodging, right? You can see here that I have this really nice range. You know, this is D-pad, right? So in terms of max speed, and I can still pretty much ramp up very quickly to the edges with the D-pad, but I also have this nice, really small inner range for refined control. And I often in my games, I have a lot of bullets. And so I'm finding it's a lot of fun to have this really refined, low analog stick input range of control. It's a little bit unique, you know, but we have control now to do this, and you can decide for yourself what type of control experience you want. Because, you know, at the very core of every game, right? If you can't control your game consistently, and this is the advice I give to a lot of early developers when I'm playing their games, it's, you know, when I tap the button, how fast am I moving? And a lot of times, as I've spent hundreds of hours building our own shmups, our ability to control the craft and control the craft in terms of how far the craft moves on screen per D-pad input, we get really comfortable with, right? It becomes like second nature, right? So, and a lot of times what happens is that developers, they will over crank and let you have much faster speeds, not counting shmups that give you speed control. It's a different thing. But, and it takes a little time to get used to how far do you move on every D-pad input, right? So, okay. All right. So that was stick dead zone, stick sensibility. What else we got? Or sensitivity. All right. So there's that. So we talked about the range. We talked about stick drift. All right. So a couple tips. So final tips for you guys out there. Test on different controllers. I just went over this past weekend up to spend time with my son and his friend, and I let them play they were very kind to play the latest version of the DrBossKey shoot 'em up, and they were playing with PlayStation 4 controllers. So every controller, like I said, is different, right? And so you owe it to yourself to try to also get as many controllers as you can, because the way I tuned the analog stick for a PlayStation 5 controller is different, and the amount of control I have over my game, and even the game I'm building at that point, right, it has more variability based on the way people are trying to control it. I recommend that people play my game with analog sticks, but they don't have to. But the point is that it's going to be different for different controllers, and you owe it to yourself to get as wide a range as possible. I know you can't go out there and get 100 controllers, so don't sweat that. But at least, you know, if you have the opportunity to play on different controllers, then make notes for yourself, because you now have the ability to tune that, right? Stick dead zone is a big part of that, right? Stick sensitivity is also a big part of that. And then what else do we got? That was okay. And then the other piece here. Because Shmup Creator allows you to play with a keyboard and a controller, and most of the controllers are just out of the box, easy plug and play stuff, super, super cool, you owe it to yourself to play with a D-pad, play on a keyboard, play on an analog stick, and make sure each of those experiences feel good to you. Because good to you because you need to design for that, right? If you only play your game with a D-pad and you haven't tweaked your controls for analog stick, anyone that tries to play your game with an analog stick, it won't be designed, and it may not feel great to them. And that might turn them off, because you might have players that prefer analog stick. And so you want to make sure you design for that, right? And you can't design for it if you don't play with it, right? So it also makes a big difference on how you dodge bullets, right? So if you have a really, really high player speed, dodging intricate patterns of bullets is going to be harder to achieve if you have designed your player speed to be really fast, and every time the player taps the D-pad, if they shoot across the screen, they'll have a harder time to understand how to avoid bullets, right? So it's just food for thought. Same thing goes like if I design my bullet patterns for really slow speeds to be achieved with the analog stick, like I'm showing here, and then people are playing my game with a D-pad and I have a really high speed and they don't have that same level of refined control for dodging the same patterns, then I've done those players a disservice that are playing with keyboards and D-pads. So I hope that makes sense, gives a little bit of framing. All right, I think those were the big aspects. Like I said again, I will leave a link in the description for this really cool controller overlay. Fantastic work. It's more for streamers, but you know, if you're going to record Let's Plays for other people in the community, it's also super helpful to see what buttons they're pressing, right? And what analog stick usage they're using, D-pad. It gives you information you wouldn't have otherwise, and that's super helpful for designing and further developing your games. Okay, I think with that, I think we're good to go. Thank you everybody for tuning in and watching these videos. Thank you for following the channel. Thank you for the subscribes. Feel free to boop that follow buttons, subscribe buttons, snoop, whatever that is. It's good for the algorithms. Thank you everyone that's been playtesting and providing feedback. The game has really come a long way. And it's just so humbling to have so much time and effort now put into this amazing passion project that I have and being able to share it with everyone and to let that continue developing and crafting in a more and improved experience. It's been a crazy amount of fun. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time. Bye.